Jamming.
Some folks wrong, made the way to flag. Ooh, the red, white, and blue. And when the band plays, hey, through the tree, oh, they point the cannon at you, yeah. It ain't me, it ain't me, it ain't me. I ain't no one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. That song you just heard was one of the anthems of the Vietnam War protests during the 60s. Arguably one of the most recognizable songs. Obviously, as you can see by the slide here, we're in our Vietnam unit. You should have completed, from Tuesday, you should have completed the brief assignment on the Vietnam War. Kind of just give me a little introduction in terms of the history behind it, how it got started, and why it got started. So that should be submitted to me at this point. So what you're going to be doing is you are going to be watching this lecture, obviously, as you're doing, and you're going to be filling in your guided notes. I should have given you guys the guided notes on Monday. If you, for some reason, weren't here on Monday, or if you were at home, you could always print them off on Google Classroom. I always post the guided notes, or you can just create a Google Doc and just type in the notes as we go. So obviously, one of my favorite units is Vietnam. So a couple things, obviously. It's about time frame. Now, overall, the dates are a little bit how can I put this? From 1950 to 1974, these weren't all like combat related and whatnot. We typically, in terms of boots on the ground, we started overall having a presence in Vietnam right around 1950. Very small presence, basically just helping out the French, as you guys learned about in your reading from Tuesday. It won't be until the mid to late 60s where we actually put a ton, hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground. That's when the escalation is going to start. So overall time frame for what we're going to be referencing here in this class during the course of this unit: Vietnam War, 1950 to 1974, long involvement, throughout, as we'll discuss. And one of the things I felt was really interesting, as you can tell by the picture here, war is hell. Vietnam is going to take an extreme toll on these soldiers. It's going to be an absolute brutal war. Because of how the war is being fought, as we'll get into. So this little stat I found I thought was really interesting. In World War II, the average combat time for an average U.S. soldier that fought in the war was about 40 days over a 4-year period, where they actually were like on the ground combat in the middle of an engagement. Whereas in Vietnam, you're talking about the average combat time was 240 days in 1 year. So this was extremely brutal. And obviously, it's, in terms of cost, the cost is going to be obviously a lot of money over the course of these years, but more importantly, cost of human life. Obviously, you can see by this picture here, this is the Vietnam War Memorial in D.C. It's one of the most iconic types of memorials that we have in D.C. It's huge, huge wall that's right outside the Washington Monument here. So if you ever go to D.C., it's something that's very breathtaking, very powerful. They have all the names of the U.S. soldiers that died in battle on this wall. So very, very, very powerful place to be. All right, so first question is, where is Vietnam? Most Americans at this time, and I would even argue most Americans to this very day, don't really know where Vietnam is even located at. So here's China, Japan's up here, here's the Philippines. I know we talked about Philippines in World War II. So we're talking about just south of China. There's a little peninsula basically. This little tiny thing in red here. It's just from north to south. Again, not very wide, it's more long. You have this is Vietnam. They call it Indochina because it once was a part of China. But you also have borders China. You have Laos and Thailand, the Cambodia and Vietnam that all compose this region. So this is where we're talking about, again, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away across the ocean in this region of the world. And kind of keep that in mind. But again, most Americans at this time really never even heard of Vietnam until we started sending troops there. So some climate, obviously you can tell by the map there. You know, in terms of just overall climate, you're talking about very hot, very tropical, especially in the summer months. Average temperature is 91 degrees in the summertime, and you're talking about very tropical and moist climates where you have 12 inches of rain on average in July. So it's very jungle-like, very humid. Whereas in Cleveland here, we get about 3.5 inches of rain over the course of July. There's almost 4 times that. So it's very hot, very humid. Like think about here in Cleveland when it rains. After it rains during the summer months, it gets very humid outside. Well, it's basically what it's like there almost all the time in July. So very hot, as you can tell by the map here. It's very mountainous, very hilly, and a lot of it is jungle. So think about too, we're going into Vietnam. You know, we're attacking them. So we're taking them on not kind of, on their home turf. They are prepared to defend their country, and look at the terrain that they're going to use. You can't really see them. Very similar to what was used in World War II with the Japanese. The Vietnamese are gonna use underground tunnels, networks. They're gonna hide below ground. They're gonna use guerrilla war tactics, as we'll talk about later on. So it's gonna be extremely hard for U.S. troops to find the enemy. But two, although we are superior in terms of our weapons really gonna matter when your enemy's hiding underground? No, you need to put more boots in the ground. So we'll get into that over the course of this unit, but again, a very brutal style where you need to go and search for the enemy, and it's not always going to be fought on your terms. It's going to be fought on their terms because again they're hiding. They know where you're going to be. They can dictate when to fight and where to fight based upon their hiding locations throughout the jungle. All right. So obviously, as you guys did in your assignment on Tuesday, Vietnam is a country that has a history of being controlled. Oops, I'm sorry, wrong one. I know I forgot something. Vietnam has a history of being controlled by foreign powers. So you look at its history, they have a long history of fighting off countries, fighting for their independence, and being ruled by other countries. So it started up in China. They were controlled by China for a very long time before the 1800s. And then eventually they were controlled by France, and from 1800s to about 1941. And then once France fell to Nazi Germany in World War II, that's when their reign ended in Vietnam. But Japan took them over from 1941 till 1945 when they eventually surrendered. And when the war ended in 1945, when Japan surrendered, France wanted to come back and reclaim it as a colony. And once that happened, you started having like nationalist independent groups within Vietnam that began to form. So you had communist groups combined with other groups, and they formed this group called the Viet Minh. Essentially what they wanted to achieve independence. They wanted to gain independence. They wanted to get rid of all these foreign powers, and they wanted to, maintain their own sovereignty within their country. The leader of this group, again, keep this in mind, we'll reference him basically all throughout the unit, was a guy by the name of Ho Chi Minh. Very popular in Vietnam. He was also known as Uncle Ho throughout Vietnam, would go from village to village, but he was like really their crusader, their freedom fighter, a guy who people will lean on to lead them throughout the next several decades. So very important name, the Viet Minh, the communist group. So if you think about this as the time period too, the Cold War. So think about our opinion of communists and our goal of containment. So keep that in mind for here in a few minutes. So I don't know why I keep doing this. So post World War II Vietnam, after World War II, France controls Vietnam. They conquered the southern half of Vietnam. However, the northern part is taken over by the Viet Minh. Again, that communist group. They take control of the northern section. So essentially, for the next 8 years, that leads to fighting between the French forces and Viet Minh forces for the next 8 years, and it's brutal style warfare. Now, in that time frame, of those 8 years, the U.S. does get involved. President Eisenhower develops the domino theory. He believes that if one of these smaller countries like Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, that if one of these small countries falls, the rest are going to fall behind it. So this kind of reinforces our containment policy. This is why we're going to get involved in Korea. This is why we're going to get involved in Vietnam, because they're a smaller country. If these smaller countries fall, then boom, the dominoes begin to fall. So what we're going to do is we're going to help out the French. Not so much with military, but we're going to help out with a lot of money. We're going to pay for about 90% of the French tab for this war. We're going to send weapons. We're going to send ammo. We're going to send advisors to help out the French. So we don't necessarily have a big boots on the ground and military presence in terms of soldiers on the ground, but we're going to have a lot of like the strategic money, financing, and sending some generals over there to help and advisors to help the French. However, by 1954, they had the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. This was a very strategic, important battle in the Vietnam War for the French. The French are going to lose. Huge battle, and essentially this is going to force the French to lose Vietnam. Again, this is a big victory for the Viet Minh, a big victory for Ho Chi Minh, because now they inspire confidence. This is like their rallying cry. They can now put it on their shoulders now that they dispelled a European power in France. They won against a big superpower, a huge country, a big military power. So this is a huge boost to Ho Chi Minh's record, to his popularity, and now you have, as part of the peace settlement, something called the Geneva Accords. This was in your reading. Again, very important vocabulary. I would highlight this in your notes as well, along with Dien Bien Phu and some of the other vocabulary that we already covered. But the Geneva Accords is important because at this conference you have foreign powers meeting with the Vietnamese, and they agree at this conference, they agree for temporarily to split Vietnam at the 17th parallel. So very similar to Korea, which was the 38th parallel. They'll create a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, again, same as North Korea. So the North Vietnam will be controlled by communists, by Ho Chi Minh. The Viet Minh will control the northern section, and then the southern section will be controlled by anti-communists, as we'll get to here in a little bit. But their ultimate goal, what they agree to, again, this is in 1954, they agree, and 2 years later, they agree that they're going to have an election, a nationwide election, to bring the country together, to unite, where they'll have the South Vietnamese leader will go against the North Vietnamese leader. So it'll be Ho Chi Minh against his opponent. So that was the agreement. So a temporary split of Vietnam, North and South, at the 17th parallel. That was only going to last 2 years. The thought was you'd have that election that would decide, where Vietnam's going to head. All right. So that is going to be it for today. That's all you need to do is just fill out your notes. We'll pick this up on Monday and Tuesday next week. So I will be checking these notes to make sure that you did them. This is your assignment that you need to do. So anyway, adios, and I'll see you guys next week.